am appalled that you would continue to vote for the United States sending weapons to Israel. That just that hurts. It absolutely hurts me.
Honestly, I believe, even going back to October 7th, 2 years ago, I mean, the slaughter of 1,200 people. And the one thing about look, I'm not a psychologist, and I don't play one on TV. I have a lot of friends in the Jewish community. I went to college with a lot of folks. I worked at Temple B'rith Kodesh when I was in college during my many shifts in and out of college. But I'm going to continue to support their right to exist and continue to help them defend themselves. But I don't see them as aggressive, but others do. I mean, I understand people have different opinions on what happened here, and their response to 1,200 citizens being slaughtered. People will argue, certainly, people do argue, that it was an overreaction to it. I don't think, it's the history of Jews in the world is such that I think they're particularly interested in making sure anybody who attacks them will think twice next time.
Joe Morelli openly backs Israel's ongoing destruction of Palestinian lives and land, and he's been paid handsomely for it. In 2023 to 24, Joe received nearly $196,000 from AIPAC L3 Harris and other pro-Israel lobbyists. In return, he is expected to vote to fund Israeli military endeavors. He claims those votes are his way of supporting Israel. Others call it the deliberate destruction of a land and its people. Check out his voting record since October 7th. The U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights released scorecards grading House members' level of support for Palestine. Joe scored an F. Israel has now murdered over 70,000 Palestinians, including 20,000 children, 13,000 women, 1,700 medical personnel, and 260 journalists and members of the media. Over 9,200 Palestinian prisoners are still being held in Israeli custody. Inhuman and degrading treatment is common, including severe beatings, arbitrary torture, sexual assault, humiliation, deliberate starvation, sleep deprivation, denial of adequate medical treatment, and under those conditions, at least 98 prisoners have died. Under international law, all of that is a war crime. Is Joe listening? Joe chose to contribute to this devastation. He says he wants to rebuild Gaza after the war ends. It would have been better if he hadn't voted to finance the destruction in the first place. AIPAC, one of the biggest political power brokers in Washington, has perfected the art of turning billionaire cash into political obedience. Hiding behind the slogan, "Being pro-Israel is good policy and good politics," it shovels piles of money into elections to crush any candidate who dares criticize Israel's actions. Democratic members of Congress are now rejecting AIPAC money. A large number of new candidates for the 2026 House primaries have declared they will refuse it. Public opinion has begun to turn. The Block the Bombs Act is now backed by at least 57 co-sponsors. It calls for a prohibition of the sale of a variety of U.S. weapons and a limitation on military services to the Israeli government. Joe refuses to sign on. We need to keep up the pressure and elect leaders who stand boldly for human rights and justice.
I just hope and pray that you will find it in your heart when that next bill comes forward that sends more of our weapons to Israel, knowing what Israel does, will not sign that bill.
Well, just to be clear, though, I will continue to support military aid to Israel. We are the only nation in the world that's a democracy that can send military all across the globe. I'm very, very aware of the challenges here in the awful loss of life. And we just got to do better. And I'm praying every day. I think it's fragile, the ceasefire, but it needs to hold, and we need to be able to move on from there and rebuild Gaza and rebuild and stop the settlement on the West Bank. You go back to the 40s, following the atrocities of World War II and the decision by world leaders that Israel needed and Jews needed a homeland. Our Palestinians were kind of left out. They didn't have a homeland. So, you know, the sort of the problem from its inception was, even as we were making the decision on where Israel should be, and what their footprint would look like, they were essentially left in the middle of an area where they had enemies all around. In terms of real estate, I mean, Gaza can be, it's in the Fertile Crescent. I mean, it could be an extraordinary place, but it is besieged by this conflict.
Research time, Joe. Saying that Palestinians didn't have a homeland is an indication of just how much you have been indoctrinated by both misinformation from the U.S. media and your strong ties to and reliance on the Zionist community in Rochester. Here is what you should have said. Palestinians are a diverse and complex people indigenous to the land of Palestine. Their presence there stretches back thousands of years. Yet there has been a persistent effort to erase or obscure over 4,000 years of Palestinian history. The Zionist Jews' claim that they are the rightful heirs is rooted in politics and colonialism. While Jews do have historic roots to the land, the Arab population has considered Palestine home since the early 1800s, when Jews made up less than 10% of the population. Calling Palestine a land without a people is a narrative used to justify claims that Palestine belongs not to its inhabitants, but to Jews. The Zionist movement, and later the Israeli state, advanced this narrative while enforcing it through policies and practices rooted in force and displacement. In doing so, they also abused the initial hospitality of the Palestinian Arab population. The actual truth is that Palestine's past is marked by waves of civilizations, conquests, migrations, and cultural exchange. The Ottoman census of 1870, for example, recorded Palestine's population at approximately 85% Muslim, 9% Christian, 3% native Jews, and 2% foreign born Jews, a clear reflection of a long established, rooted society. It is time to reframe the conversation, Joe.
Supporting the Israelis has meant supporting what's really the only democracy in the region.
U.S. politicians like to say that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, but Israel is not a democracy, not even close. Israel has total control over the West Bank and Gaza. In Israel, parties and candidates that deny Israel's Jewish identity oppose the political system or are accused of supporting terrorism, are barred from running for office. In 2018, the nation-state law was passed. It says that the right to national self-determination belongs exclusively to the Jewish people. Arab and other minority communities are denied privileges when it comes to education and economic opportunity, and often clash with the criminal justice system. Since October 2023, hundreds have been arrested for public and online protests, often without due process. Journalists have faced harassment and intimidation, and at least 260 have been murdered. And as in U.S., there's government corruption, including the many scandals of Prime Minister Netanyahu for fraud, bribery, and breach of trust. Israel has roughly 10 million citizens who have voting rights. An additional 5.5 million Palestinians live under varying forms of Israeli authority without comparable rights. In East Jerusalem, about 350,000 Palestinians live in territory annexed by Israel. Most are not citizens and have limited legal protections. They may vote in municipal, but not national elections. In the West Bank, around 3 million Palestinians live under Israeli military rule, and there are around 700,000 Jewish Israelis who live illegally in the West Bank with full citizenship rights, legal protections, and voting rights. Despite the anger and accusations of anti-Semitism shouted by our Zionist neighbors, it is actually Israel that controls from the river to the sea. Full rights for Jewish citizens, partial rights for Palestinian citizens, and minimal or no rights for millions of Palestinians under occupation. Not a democracy,
The bombs that were dropped on Gaza have destroyed like 85% or somewhere around there of the buildings there, not to mention, I think it's up to about 70,000 people, one third of them children. I just don't understand how you can look at something like what has happened there. I use the word genocide. People disagree with that.
What I do pray for is that this ceasefire takes hold. I would strongly support a multinational force led primarily by the Arab nations in Gaza as peacekeeping, with the clearly the support of the American government, because we're going to have to be there to help continue to safeguard the interests of peace in the region. I have been to Palestine. I've met with President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority. I've been to Israel. I've been to Bethlehem. The long-term interests of the United States and stability and peace in the world and in that region will require a two-state solution.
A two-state solution impossible. Its goal is to systematically take over more and more of Palestinian land, thus eliminating the foundations of any future Palestinian state. Strategically, like adding holes to Swiss cheese, their settlements in the West Bank have been built to surround, divide, and cut off land occupied by Palestinian landholders. They deny access to important resources like water. Infrastructure like roadways has been blocked or destroyed. As land continues to be stolen, the prospects of Palestinian refugees ever returning to their homes disappears. How do you build a state out of Swiss cheese? The UN has adopted a resolution endorsing President Trump's plan to set up an international stabilization force and a so-called Board of Peace that he will chair. Perhaps he will get to build his Gaza Riviera. Rather than paving a path toward ending the occupation and protecting the Palestinian people, there will be external control over Gaza. Israel's unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory will continue. Replacing one abusive trustee with another is not self-determination. It's against the law. There are other options that have been suggested, like the establishment of a single state with equal rights for all, or a confederacy of two sovereign states existing in partnership on the same land. There is no easy solution, but what is clear is that Joe's two-state solution is motivated by establishment politics, not reality. He should be advocating for self-governance, equality, and the right for the Palestinian people to choose their own path. And before we go, here are 6 more bits of information you should know about Joe. 1. In 2018, the Congressional Progressive Caucus backed him when he ran for Congress, but in 2022, they insisted he leave the caucus after declining to support key progressive bills and candidates. He is now labeled a corporate-aligned centrist. 2. On November 25th, Joe joined a minority of Democrats voting for a Republican resolution condemning all forms of socialism, including democratic socialism. That would include fellow Democrats like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, Bernie Sanders, and Zohran Mamdani, as well as countries such as Norway, Sweden, Austria, and Denmark. Is Joe not feeling up to the challenge? 3. Joe was one of only 48 Democrats to vote for the Laken-Riley Act, which allows the deportation of non-citizens charged with crimes before legal proceedings and without a conviction. 4. In June 2024, Joe was one of 62 out of 144 Democrats who supported an amendment barring the State Department from citing death and injury figures from the Gaza Health Ministry, the agency best positioned to report casualties. 5. On 2 separate votes, 3 weeks apart, Joe sided with the House Republicans on bills related to the International Holocaust Remembrance Association's definition of anti-Semitism. Included in that definition is speech that criticizes not the Jewish people, but the Zionist state of Israel itself. This IHRA definition has been widely weaponized to severely restrict freedom of expression and assembly. The first initiative Joe voted on gives the federal government the power to withhold funds for any colleges that hold events perceived to have violated the IHRA definition. Ironically, 3 weeks later, to legitimize the first initiative, once again, Joe joined the Republicans in creating a law that formally recognizes the IHRA definition referred to in the first vote. And last but not least, this past June, when Los Angeles was dealing with ICE raids, President Trump deployed more than 1,700 National Guard members and 700 Marines to Los Angeles to crush protests against a growing number of ICE raids and mass arrests. That week, Joe broke ranks with the vast majority of Democrats and voted yes on a Republican House resolution which expressed gratitude to law enforcement officers and ICE personnel for, quote, protecting the homeland. While Joe was, as he said later, hesitantly signing this resolution, Ilhan Omar proved to be a better role model. She voted against the resolution and continued working on a law she had introduced in May that will hold police accountable for violence against protesters. In addition, Rashida Tlaib responded by saying that sending military to LA was evidence that the country is falling into fascism. And yet Joe was thankful. Do we trust him here in our hometown? At a time when the rights of many are being revoked, will Joe fight for us? Election season is upon us. Joe's responses on this video and elsewhere are filled with mistruths and deflections, often shifting blame and responsibility to others. It's time to replace Joe with a progressive who advocates for social justice, dignity, and equality for all people. A person who we can count on to work for universal health care and child care, public power, affordable housing for all, and climate action. Someone who is not influenced and ruled by corporate interests and will work to protect free speech, both on campus and in our communities. Someone who will honor diversity and recognize that weaponizing anti-Semitism reduces our democracy and closes minds. Someone who we can count on to support and protect the rights of immigrants. We need a person who goes beyond Joe's handshakes, photo taking, video selfies, and framed congressional certificates of honor. Finally, to you who have watched this entire video, it's the responsibility of all of us to speak out. Speaking out for Palestinians is critical as the real story has been obscured for so long. Search for the truth. Don't rely on the corporate-run establishment media and the words of politicians who bend and twist their words to get your vote. When Joe or our other representatives aren't listening, shout louder. Speak out for the oppressed, the colonized, and the silenced. Now is the time.